Now let's have a look at the dependency injection and wiring. Let's go to our JDBC product DAO. And let's say we want to create a variable here called connection of type connection. This becomes a dependency of this particular class. And because of the @setter, we also have a set connection as a function over here. You can see that there's a set connection because of the setter. Now I can alter my create connection function such that create a new connection only if this connection is equals to null. So I can come down here and I can say if connection not equals to null, as well as connection dot is closed equals to false, then we will return connection. But in case if the connection is either null or has it been closed, then we create a new connection using these member variables. If you run the code as is, you will see that it is not going to give you any errors. You will still see that there are 77 products. That's because using app-config1, we are able to supply this particular DAO where we have manually initialized all the values. Obviously, the connection is null. So this condition is false. So this whole thing is skipped. Based on the driver class name URL user, it's manufacturing a new one. What we will do now is we'll make a new app config. So we're going to copy this app config 1 and paste it as app config 2. Let's use that app config 2. We don't want these constructors. We don't want this dummy DAO here. We don't want lazy and all those stuff. So let's just keep everything simple. We'll also delete this system.out.println. We'll also remove these setters because what we want to do is to assign a connection object. Now, what if connection itself is a different bean? For example, if I have public connection, let's say we'll call it as connection class.for name of driver class name. And then we say here return driver manager dot get connection of URL username password. Both of them throw exception. First of all, connection needs to be imported. So let's just import it from java.sql. And then we will also throw away all the exceptions that we get over here. So since Spring is going to call this function, so Spring will handle the exceptions by breaking our application. But for that to work, we have to say @bean. When you actually create a Spring container using app config 2, Spring calls this function automatically and loads the driver class name, creates a new DB connection, and then keeps it with a name called connection. That's one bean. And the second bean happens to be this, where we say that this bean can make use of this bean. In other words, there is a dependency of a connection type over here, and this bean object can be wired to this bean. There are a couple of ways you can do. Number one is you can say DAO.setConnection and then call this function over here, just like that, where I am calling the function and that function is going to return a connection object. We're going to set it up over here. And the error here is because of these two checked exceptions we are not handling over here. The second method is, since this particular function is called by Spring, you can ask Spring to supply any other beans that you want. For example, if I declare a variable called connection here like this. Now, since Spring is going to call this function, Spring looks at this parameter type and then checks, hey, you need a connection. And I do have a connection over here. Now, what if I have two functions that return connection object? This is the dependency injection that Spring resolves by making use of this name of the bean. Name of the variable that you've got here is called connection. And the name of the bean is connection over here. So there won't be a problem in resolving that. So Spring does a dependency injection here. Now that I got this connection, I can supply that to my setter. And now you see we are doing a wiring. So at this place, it's called the injection of dependency. And this is basically the wiring, which is actually manually done because I'm doing the wiring, not automatically done. Let's save this, go back to our program. Our program is making use of app config 1. Make sure that it's coming from app config 2 now. So let's import that and run the code. We should still get the same result as that there are 77 products. And let's go to app config 2 and have a look at this. This is called manual wiring. Now, Spring can also do an automatic wiring. For example, let's say we comment out these lines and then say here return new JDBC product DAO. At this time, whenever we ask for the JDBC DAO in our program, like this, we are actually getting an instance of this, which is an object of this class over here. And all these 5 member variables are null. So when actually create connection is called, connection is null, so this fails. And class.forName null will result into a null pointer exception. So if you run the code now, you should see a null pointer exception, right? Alternately, we can ask Spring to do an automatic wiring. So at this time, the application JVM looks like this. You have a CTX as a reference variable that points to a Spring container. And the Spring container has been loaded with these 2 beans. So the bean number 1 is the connection, bean number 2 is the JDBC DAO. But they are not wired with each other because we are not doing any manual wiring. And when we go to the program over here, when we said DAO equals to ctx.getBean, this is the actual object that we are getting. However, the object is not initialized with any member variables, so they're all nulls, and then we are eventually getting the null pointer exception. What we want to do is we want Spring to automatically wire this connection with this particular bean object. So this is supposed to be done. To do that, I can go to JDBC product DAO and then mark this particular variable with an annotation of @autowired. So I'll say here @autowired, save it. Now if I go back to the program and note that appconfig2 still has no connection between these 2 bean objects, no wiring, but my program should still work because of the auto wiring. And you can see that our application is working and it says there are 77 products.